Welcome back to Fiction Flux, everyone. Today, we're diving into a brand new fanfic that's going to take us on a wild ride. What if Izuku Midoriya, our beloved Deku, became emotionless, shutting down all his feelings and ultimately embracing a dark path as a villain? It's a what-if scenario that flips everything we know about Deku on its head, and it's going to get intense. So, no more wasting time, let's dive right into the story and see where this alternate version of Deku takes us. Let's begin. Deku had always been the kind of person who wore his heart on his sleeve. He cared about his friends, his family, and always dreamed of becoming a hero like All Might. But everything changed one day after a mission went horribly wrong. It started with a simple rescue. Deku and his classmates were assigned to save civilians caught in a burning building. Everything was going smoothly until an unexpected explosion rattled the whole area. In the chaos, Deku saw one of his friends, Bakugo, caught in the blast. Without thinking, Deku rushed to save him. But when he reached Bakugo, he was too late. Bakugo had already been badly injured. Deku tried to help him, but the damage was done. Bakugo's injuries were severe, and Deku couldn't do anything to stop it. The guilt that hit him was overwhelming. His heart twisted with the feeling that he had failed not only as a hero but as a friend. That night, something inside him snapped. Deku had always carried the weight of wanting to save everyone. But this failure, this feeling of powerlessness, was too much for him to bear. He couldn't stop thinking about how he had let someone down, someone who mattered to him. The next day, something changed in Deku. He woke up with no tears, no anger, no fear, just an empty space inside of him. He no longer cared about saving people or being the hero. The spark in his eyes was gone. Every person he passed, every word he heard, felt meaningless. The world felt hollow, and he couldn't understand why he had tried so hard to be something he wasn't. The more Deku thought about it, the more he realized that being a hero didn't matter anymore. His emotions were nothing but weaknesses, and they only caused pain. He started pushing people away, no longer responding to his friends' calls or his mother's worry. He stopped fighting for the right reasons. Soon, Deku's actions started to change. He stopped trying to save people and began doing whatever it took to survive. He fought with no remorse, no empathy for anyone in his path. His quirk was powerful, but now, it was only used for his own goals. The love he once had for his friends turned into indifference, and the desire to be a hero turned into a hunger for power. He became ruthless, cold, and determined to make the world see him as someone to be feared. People started noticing the change in him. His old friends tried to reach out, but it was too late. He didn't care about their concern or their pleas. The Deku they knew was gone. In his place stood a person who was numb to the world, a person who had nothing left to lose. For the first time in his life, Deku felt free. He wasn't bound by the expectations of others, not even by his own dreams. He was emotionless, and for him, that was the only way to survive in this cruel world. But deep down, even he knew something was missing, a part of him that he couldn't understand, a tiny flicker of something that might still be there, but he had buried it too deep to feel anymore. Now, Deku walked down a dark path, no longer a symbol of hope but a shadow of his former self. As time passed, Deku's transformation became more apparent. The people who once admired him for his determination and kindness began to fear him. He no longer showed the slightest hint of hesitation when making decisions. He would take down anyone who stood in his way, hero or villain didn't matter. The world had lost the boy who dreamed of saving everyone, and in his place was a person who had no interest in saving anyone at all. One day, as he was walking through the city, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Uraraka. She had always been his closest friend, someone who had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Deku, wait up, she shouted, running to catch up with him. Deku didn't stop. He didn't even glance her way. His heart was empty, and nothing she said could make him feel again. Please, what's happened to you? Uraraka's voice wavered with worry. You're not the same. You used to care about us. You used to care about being a hero. Deku's footsteps didn't falter. He kept walking, his face expressionless. Being a hero is pointless, he said coldly, his voice devoid of any emotion. People get hurt, people die, and in the end, nothing changes. It's all just a game, Uraraka. And I'm done playing it. Uraraka's eyes filled with tears, but she reached out, grabbing his arm. Deku, I know you're hurting. We all are. But this isn't the way. You're not alone. You never were. Deku jerked his arm away from her grip, turning to face her for the first time. His eyes were empty, as if all the light had been drained from them. You don't get it, he said quietly. I don't need anyone. Not anymore. Uraraka stood there, speechless, as Deku walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Her heart ached as she watched the person she once knew fade further and further from her reach. She didn't understand how it had come to this, but she refused to give up on him. Later that night, Deku stood atop a tall building, looking down at the city below. He had always dreamed of being a hero, but now, all he saw was a world full of weakness and despair. The heroes, the villains, the people, they were all the same to him. None of them mattered. His mind wandered back to the day of the explosion. Bakugo's injury. The moment when Deku realized that despite everything, he couldn't save everyone. It was that moment that shattered something inside of him. And now, that emptiness was his new reality. As he stood on the edge of the building, something tugged at his chest. It wasn't guilt or regret. It wasn't even anger. It was a feeling. A feeling he couldn't quite place, but it was there. For a moment, it made him hesitate. He looked down, and for the first time in a long while, he saw the faces of the people below, the ones who looked up to him, the ones who once believed in him. But Deku didn't jump. Instead, he turned away, walking deeper into the darkness of the city. There was no going back. His emotions had been buried too deep, and the person he once was felt like a distant memory. Deku had made his choice. He would no longer be the symbol of hope. He would no longer be the person who saved others. But deep down, somewhere in the corners of his mind, a small voice whispered. What if he could still be something more? But that thought, like all others, was quickly buried, as the boy who once dreamed of saving everyone slowly faded into the shadows of a world that no longer seemed to care. Days passed, and Deku's transformation into a cold, emotionless figure only deepened. The hero community was on edge, whispers spreading about the once celebrated boy who had turned his back on everything he once stood for. All Might, who had watched Deku grow from a determined child into a hopeful young man, could hardly believe what he was hearing. He refused to accept that his successor had truly become a villain. One afternoon, All Might found himself standing in front of the old building where Deku used to train. The place was quiet now, no longer filled with the sound of determined footsteps or passionate talks about becoming a great hero. Why, Midoriya? All Might whispered to himself, his heart heavy. Why did you choose this path? He knew Deku better than anyone. He had always been someone who felt too much, someone who wanted to save everyone no matter the cost. But this new Deku, the one who cared about nothing, who hurt those closest to him, was a stranger. All Might couldn't understand what had happened to his beloved successor, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. Meanwhile, Deku, now operating in the shadows, was beginning to make a name for himself, but not as the hero he once dreamed of being. His quirk was still powerful, but now he used it to create chaos and destruction, leaving behind confusion and fear. He moved in the dark, planning his next moves with precision, targeting both the hero society and anyone who stood in his way. He had no allies, no one to trust. Even those who had once admired him now saw him as a threat. In his mind, that was all he was now, a force, unbothered by the constraints of emotions. He didn't need anyone's approval. He didn't need love or support. The world was full of betrayal, weakness, and pointless ideals, and he would show them all how insignificant they were. But even as Deku stood at the edge of his new life, a part of him couldn't fully silence the nagging feeling in his chest. When he was alone, he would sometimes remember moments from the past, his training with All Might, the bond he had with his classmates, and the dreams he once had. The flickers of emotion were small, fleeting, but they were there. He'd brush them off quickly, not allowing himself to feel for too long. After all, what good was feeling? What had it ever done for him? One evening, as Deku walked through the abandoned streets, a familiar face appeared before him, Uraraka. Her eyes were filled with determination, but there was a soft sadness behind them. She had been looking for him, unable to let go of the person she had known, the person she still hoped was somewhere inside the stranger before her. Deku, please, she said, her voice shaking. I know you're in there. I know you're still the same person, even if you don't believe it. This isn't you. You don't have to be alone. Deku's gaze softened for a moment. He could feel the warmth of her words, the care she still had for him, but it felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The empty space inside him stirred again, but he shut it down, burying it deep within himself. You don't understand, he replied coldly. I don't need you, Uraraka. I don't need anyone. Why? She asked, stepping closer, her voice full of quiet desperation. Why are you doing this to yourself? You're not a villain. You never were. You can still come back. You can still. No, Deku interrupted, his tone sharp. I was a hero. I tried to be a hero. But that was a lie. All of it was. I've seen the truth now. The world doesn't care about good or bad. It only cares about who's the strongest, who can survive. And right now, I'm the strongest. Uraraka's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't back down. But that's not you, Deku. The real you always wanted to save people. You always wanted to protect them, no matter what. I don't believe this is the end for you. I won't believe it. For the briefest moment, Deku's walls wavered. Her words hit harder than he expected, and he felt the stirrings of something he couldn't push away this time. But before he could process the emotion, his resolve hardened again. He took a step back, his voice colder than ever. Maybe that was me once. But that person is gone now. Uraraka stood there, heartbroken. She could see the pain in his eyes, even if he refused to acknowledge it. She didn't know what to say, but she couldn't just leave him like this. I'll wait for you, Deku, she said softly. No matter what happens, I'll never stop believing in you. Deku didn't answer. He didn't say anything at all. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness once more. As he moved through the night, he couldn't shake the weight of Uraraka's words. They lingered in his mind, a constant echo that refused to quiet. Maybe, deep down, a part of him still wanted to be saved. But that part was buried so deep beneath the surface that he didn't know how to reach it anymore. For now, Deku would continue on his path, disconnected from the world, from his friends, and from the emotions he once felt. But the small flicker of doubt, the tiny spark of hope, refused to be snuffed out entirely. Maybe, one day, he would find his way back. But for now, he was a villain. And the world would learn just how far he was willing to go to prove that being emotionless was the only way to survive. Days turned into weeks, and Deku's path only grew darker. He continued to use his powers without hesitation, dismantling hero operations, battling anyone who dared challenge him. The Hero Society scrambled to figure out how to stop him, but no one knew what had happened to the boy they had once believed would save them. Meanwhile, those closest to him were still trying to understand. All Might visited the ruins of the training ground where Deku had spent so much of his childhood. The memories of their time together, the talks about heroism, the lessons, the victories and defeats, clung to him like a heavy weight. He still couldn't comprehend why Deku had turned away from everything he'd worked so hard for. One day, All Might met with Todoroki, Bakugo, and Uraraka to discuss the situation. Their faces were filled with worry and sadness, knowing they needed to act before Deku did something even worse. We have to stop him, Bakugo growled, his fists clenched. He's not the same anymore. But I won't just let him destroy everything we worked for. Uraraka, her face pale and drawn, spoke up softly. We can't just fight him, though. He's our friend. I don't know how to reach him, but I know there's still good in him. We have to try to save him. Todoroki nodded, though his face was conflicted. But what if there's nothing left to save? We don't know what's happening inside his mind. All Might placed a hand on the table, his expression full of pain. We can't give up on him. He was my successor, and I know, deep down, he still believes in the idea of being a hero. We have to remind him of that. We have to remind him who he was before all this started. The group agreed. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. Meanwhile, Deku was becoming more ruthless. The more he fought and defeated others, the more empty it felt. Every victory only solidified his belief that nothing mattered. No matter how many people he defeated, the hollow feeling inside him never went away. It was like there was a hole in his chest, one that no amount of power or destruction could fill. One night, as Deku stood on a rooftop overlooking the city, a familiar face appeared before him once again, Uraraka. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. "Deku, please," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "I know you're still in there. I know you've been hurt, but this isn't the way. You're not alone. We're all still here for you. I'm still here." Deku's expression didn't change. He stared out at the city, his heart cold, the pain too much to bear. "You don't understand," he said quietly, his voice distant. "You think you can save me. You think your words can make everything better. It's too late, Uraraka. The person you knew is gone." Uraraka's voice cracked with emotion. "That's not true. You're still the person who helped me, who made me believe in myself. You're still the person who cared. I haven't given up on you, Deku. I don't care what you think. I'll always be your friend." For a moment, there was silence. Deku felt the weight of her words, and it cut through the walls he had built around himself. Her words were like a lifeline, pulling him from the depths of his numbness, but he shoved the feeling away. "Enough," he said sharply. "This is who I am now. This is who I've become. I'm not a hero. I'm not your friend. I'm nothing." Tears streamed down Uraraka's face, but she didn't back down. "Then fight me, Deku. If you truly believe you're nothing, then fight me. But I'm not leaving until you remember who you really are." Deku's eyes flickered for a moment, the smallest hint of conflict appearing in them. He didn't move, as if he was frozen between his past and his present. For a brief second, he saw flashes of his former self, his time training with All Might, the smiles of his friends, the dreams of becoming the greatest hero. But then the anger and emptiness rushed back in. "I'm not the person you want me to be, Uraraka," he said, his voice cold once more. Without warning, he launched forward, attacking her with a force that sent shockwaves through the air. Uraraka barely managed to dodge, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if he was truly trying to hurt her, but she wasn't going to give up. She knew this was a test for him, a test to see if there was any part of the old Deku still inside. "You're wrong, Deku," Uraraka shouted as she dodged another strike. "You were the person we all believed in. You're not a villain. You're a hero. Don't let your pain control you." Deku hesitated, and for a moment, it was like the world stood still. His mind was torn between the person he had become and the person he used to be. And then, just as quickly as it came, the moment passed. He moved again, but this time, his attack was slower, more deliberate. "Stop trying to save me," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Uraraka refused to stop. "I won't stop, Deku. You're my friend, and I'll keep fighting for you, no matter how many times I have to." Deku's eyes narrowed, his fists shaking with the weight of his internal struggle. But deep down, he felt something, a small spark, a flicker of what used to be. For a second, it felt like he could remember what it was like to care, to want to protect. But then the darkness came rushing back. "I'm not your hero anymore, Uraraka," he said, his voice empty. As she looked at him, she realized something. This fight, this battle they were having, wasn't just a physical one. It was a battle for his soul. And she wouldn't give up until she won. The battle between them raged on, the sound of their blows echoing through the quiet streets. Deku was fighting more out of instinct than emotion, his strikes powerful and calculated, but there was something different now, something missing. Every punch he threw felt hollow, as though he was fighting against an enemy that wasn't just Uraraka, but his own inner turmoil. Uraraka, on the other hand, wasn't just dodging or defending herself. She was fighting with everything she had, but her true goal was something different. She wasn't trying to beat him. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She just wanted him to feel something again, to feel like the Deku they all once knew. "Deku, please," she shouted, narrowly avoiding another punch. You're not a villain. You're not a monster. You're the person who saved me when I thought I was nothing. Don't you remember? For a moment, Deku's body froze. He didn't strike. His hand was still raised, his face as cold as stone. Her words, so full of emotion, cut through the barrier he had built around himself, reminding him of who he used to be. His chest tightened, but he pushed the feeling down, determined to remain in control. Stop it, he muttered, voice hoarse. You don't get it. I don't care about any of that anymore. I'm not the same person. Tears welled up in Uraraka's eyes, but she shook her head, refusing to give up. Then why are you still here, Deku? If you don't care, why are you still fighting? Why are you still alive if you've given up on everything? If you really didn't care, you wouldn't be hurting like this. Her words struck him like a blow. Deku's eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment, something within him cracked. He could feel the weight of the past, the memories of his dreams, his friends, his desire to be a hero. It all came rushing back, and he felt like he was suffocating under the pressure of it. You think I want to feel this way? Deku snapped, his voice breaking for the first time in a long while. You think I chose this? I lost everything. I couldn't save Bakugo. I couldn't save anyone. I failed, Uraraka. I failed. Uraraka's heart clenched as she watched him struggle. He wasn't just fighting her, he was fighting himself. She took a step forward, her voice soft but unwavering. You're not alone in this, Deku. You never were. We're all here for you. We've always been here. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. Deku shook his head violently, his fists trembling. You don't understand. You don't know what it's like. The pressure, the responsibility, the endless failures, everything just keeps building up until you can't breathe. You think I wanted this life. You think I wanted to feel nothing. Uraraka took another step closer, her voice gentle but firm. I understand more than you think. We've all failed, Deku. But that doesn't make us worthless. It doesn't make us villains. It's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to feel lost. But you don't have to bury it all inside. You don't have to shut everyone out. We're here. We want to help. Deku's eyes filled with a storm of emotion, anger, sadness, regret. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to push it all away. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, threatening to consume him. For so long, he had believed that if he could just shut his emotions off, he wouldn't hurt anymore. But now, standing there with Uraraka, he realized how wrong he had been. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered, his voice raw. I don't know how to go back. I don't even know who I am anymore. Uraraka reached out, her hand shaking slightly as she gently placed it on his arm. It's okay. You don't have to have all the answers right now. We'll figure it out together. The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't filled with the same emptiness it had been before. For the first time in a long while, Deku felt like there was something to hold onto, something to guide him back from the edge. His eyes met Uraraka's, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of hope in them. Maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. Uraraka smiled softly, tears still in her eyes but a sense of relief washing over her. You don't have to apologize. I'm just glad you're starting to feel again. Deku stood there for a long moment, the battle inside of him raging. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe he didn't have to be the hero everyone expected him to be. Maybe he didn't have to carry all the burdens by himself. Maybe it was okay to ask for help, to let people in, and to finally face the emotions he had been burying for so long. As Uraraka stood there beside him, waiting patiently, Deku made a decision. He wasn't ready to be the hero he once dreamed of being, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, he could be something else, a person who could feel again, a person who could grow, and someone who wasn't alone anymore. I'll try, he said quietly, his voice filled with a newfound sense of determination. I'll try to be better. For you. For everyone. Uraraka smiled, wiping away the last of her tears. That's all I want, Deku. That's all any of us want. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Deku felt a small spark of hope reignite within him. It wasn't a big flame, but it was enough. Enough to take that first step forward. Enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find his way back to the person he used to be, and to the people who had never given up on him. The days following that moment with Uraraka were filled with a slow, but meaningful change. Deku hadn't fully found his way yet, but the first step was enough to start something new. He began to take things one day at a time, allowing himself to feel and to be around those who cared for him, even if it was difficult. The walls he had built around his heart weren't completely gone, but they had cracked. And that was a start. He didn't return to his old life as a hero right away. The wounds from his past were still too fresh, and the pain of his failures hadn't healed. But little by little, he began to work with his classmates again, starting with small interactions, like training and sparring with Bakugo. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Bakugo was still angry, still brash, but even he couldn't deny that something was changing in Deku. "You still got that same fire in you, don't you, nerd?" Bakugo said one afternoon, his usual scowl on his face. But there was something different in his tone, a begrudging respect, or perhaps understanding. Deku smiled faintly. I guess I never really lost it. Just needed to find it again." It was in these small moments, whether it was a quick laugh with Bakugo, a shared look of understanding with Todoroki, or a quiet conversation with Uraraka, that Deku began to rediscover who he was. It wasn't about being the strongest or always saving the day. It was about being present. It was about allowing himself to make mistakes, and most importantly, about allowing others to help him. But not everyone was as ready to accept this change. The hero community was still wary. Some saw Deku's transformation as a sign of weakness, as proof that he was no longer fit to be the symbol of peace. Others whispered that the boy who once wanted to protect everyone had become a threat. Even with his tentative return to the hero world, there were still those who didn't trust him. One evening, as Deku walked through the streets of the city, lost in his thoughts, he encountered someone who made his heart skip a beat. Standing in front of him, blocking his path, was All Might. The former symbol of peace stood tall, his face filled with concern, but also a touch of relief. "Midoriya," All Might's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I've been watching you. I know you're trying to find your way back, but I need to know, are you sure about this? About who you're becoming?" Deku looked up at his mentor, his heart heavy. All Might had always been the person he looked up to, the person who had taught him the most about what it meant to be a hero. To face him now, after everything that had happened, was like facing the truth of his struggles. "I'm not the same person I was," Deku replied, his voice steady, but his eyes filled with uncertainty. "But maybe that's okay. I still want to be a hero. I just have to do it my own way. I don't want to lose myself again." All Might nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. You're not the only one who has had to change, Midoriya. But remember, no matter what path you take, it's okay to lean on those who care about you. You don't have to carry the weight alone. Not anymore." Deku's heart tightened, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a genuine sense of peace. All Might had always been there for him, and even now, his guidance was helping him to see that his journey wasn't about being perfect or unbreakable. It was about growth. And that was something he could still achieve. "I won't forget that," Deku said quietly. "Thank you, All Might." With that, All Might gave him one last smile, before turning and walking away. "I'll always believe in you, Midoriya. Even if you don't believe in yourself, I'll be here." As the night fell around him, Deku stood still for a long time, thinking. He realized something important in that moment. He didn't have to be a symbol of perfection. He didn't have to be the hero everyone expected. The real hero was someone who could face their own struggles and still try to help others, no matter how many times they fell. The next morning, he walked into class, greeted by the familiar faces of his classmates, Uraraka, Bakugo, Todoroki, and the others. They didn't treat him like the hero he once was, and they didn't treat him like the villain he feared he'd become. They treated him like their friend. And for Deku, that was enough. As they trained together, the usual energy of their classroom filled the air, but this time, Deku felt lighter. The weight of his past wasn't gone, but it was no longer a burden he carried alone. His friends were there, willing to stand by him as he walked down a new path. And for the first time in a long time, Deku smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. Because maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be himself. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and there would be challenges, both from the outside world and within himself. But Deku was no longer afraid to face them. He wasn't alone anymore. And for now, that was enough. As weeks passed, Deku's transformation continued, albeit slowly. He spent more time with his friends and started to re-engage with the idea of being a hero, but on his own terms. There were moments when doubt crept back in, when the weight of the world and his failures seemed too heavy to bear, but those moments were fewer now. With his friends beside him, it felt like there was always a way forward, even if it was just one small step at a time. One afternoon, as the class was gathering for a group training session, Deku noticed something different in the way his classmates were looking at him. There was no pity in their eyes, no fear or doubt. There was trust. They had seen him struggle, seen the darkness that had taken over him, but now they saw something else, a person who was willing to fight, not just for the world, but for himself. They had seen him at his lowest, and they were still here. And that meant more to him than any victory. Uraraka caught his eye from across the room and smiled, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. She had been his rock through everything, the one who had refused to give up on him, even when he had given up on himself. She had helped him find that spark of hope again, and now, she was watching him begin to rebuild. "You ready to go, Deku?" Bakugo's voice cut through his thoughts, and Deku turned to find his friend standing there, arms crossed, a serious look on his face. Deku blinked, a bit surprised. "Yeah, I'm ready." Bakugo's expression softened ever so slightly, though he quickly masked it with his usual scowl. "Good. Don't go easy on me just 'cause you've gone soft." Deku chuckled, feeling a warmth in his chest. Even Bakugo, the one who had always pushed him hardest, seemed to be accepting the changes within him. It wasn't a full-on approval, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement that Deku could hope for. The training session was intense, as always. Deku's movements were sharp, his control over One for All growing more precise with each passing day. But this time, there was something different in the air. It wasn't just about proving himself or being the strongest. It was about connection. Each punch, each move, felt like a conversation. He was fighting with his friends, not against them. They weren't adversaries, they were partners. Later that day, as the group sat together in the common area, a rare sense of calm settled over them. Deku, despite his doubts, couldn't help but feel grateful. They weren't just classmates anymore. They were his family. And that was something he had never truly realized before. "I think we're all getting stronger," Todoroki said, looking at the group. "Not just in our abilities, but as people. We've all changed, for better or worse." Deku looked around at his classmates, his heart swelling with gratitude. He knew he was still far from being the person he once dreamed of becoming, but with each day, he was learning that heroism wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about always winning or never making mistakes. It was about growth, about learning from your mistakes, and about being there for the people you cared about. "I think so too," Deku said softly. "We've all been through a lot. But we're still here, together." Uraraka smiled at him, her eyes filled with warmth. "We always will be, Deku." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Deku didn't feel burdened by the weight of the world. It wasn't about the title of hero anymore. It wasn't about living up to expectations. It was about the people who believed in him, even when he had lost belief in himself. They were his reason to keep fighting, not just for the world, but for them, for himself. But Deku knew there was still much to face ahead. There were villains who threatened the peace of the world, and there were still battles to fight. Yet now, he no longer carried the burden alone. His friends stood by him, and together, they would face whatever came their way. That evening, as the sun set and the city around them settled into night, Deku stood on the roof of UA. High, looking out over the horizon. It was a small, quiet moment, but it meant more to him than he could put into words. The path ahead was uncertain, and there would be more challenges, more struggles. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had friends. He had hope. He had a chance to rewrite his story. And as long as he had that, he knew he could keep moving forward. Maybe I don't need to be perfect, Deku muttered to himself, his eyes reflecting the fading light of the sky. I just need to be me. The wind ruffled his hair as he closed his eyes, a soft smile tugging at his lips. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was okay with that. He would keep going, step by step, with his friends by his side. That was enough. For now, it was enough. As the days passed, Deku continued to grow, not just in his strength but in his understanding of what it meant to be a hero. The feelings of emptiness that had once consumed him no longer controlled his every thought. He wasn't chasing an impossible ideal anymore. He was learning to accept his flaws, his failures, and his humanity. His classmates, who had watched him struggle, began to see the changes. While they had always supported him, they now saw the real Deku, the boy who had once felt like he could never live up to expectations, but who was now starting to accept that those expectations were never the ones that truly mattered. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling training session, the class gathered in the common room to relax. The air was filled with light chatter, and everyone seemed at ease. Even Bakugo, who was usually reserved with his emotions, had a rare moment of calm. Todoroki, always serious, looked almost content. Uraraka, who had been beside Deku through all of his struggles, looked at him with a smile. You've come a long way, Deku. I think we all have. Deku nodded, his usual nervousness replaced with a quiet confidence. Yeah, it's been a tough road, but I think I'm starting to understand what it means to really be a hero. He turned his gaze to the window, watching the sky slowly shift from orange to purple as the sun set. It's not just about being strong or never failing. It's about being there for the people who matter, about growing with them. And trusting them to help you, too. Uraraka's smile widened. Exactly. And I know you'll keep growing, Deku. We all will. The others nodded in agreement. It was clear to them that Deku was no longer the person he had been, the one burdened by guilt and hopelessness. He had found a new purpose. And though the journey was far from over, Deku had finally found a sense of peace within himself. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between Deku and his friends grew stronger. They faced challenges together, both in their personal lives and in their missions as students training to become heroes. There were still moments of doubt, but they were fewer and farther between. They had all learned that heroism wasn't about perfection, it was about perseverance, compassion, and the strength to keep moving forward, even when things seemed impossible. Deku knew he wasn't the same person he once was. He would never be the same naive boy who believed that a hero had to be flawless. But in that acceptance, in that change, he found something even more important. He found his own humanity, and the power to become the hero he was meant to be, not because he was invincible, but because he was willing to rise, no matter how many times he fell. One day, as they all gathered in the common room, preparing for another training session, Deku stood up and faced his classmates. They were all there, just as they had always been. Bakugo, Todoroki, Uraraka, Iida, and the rest, they were his friends, his family. I've learned something important these past few months, Deku said, his voice steady. I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders alone. I have all of you, and that's enough. We can face anything as long as we're together. A few of his classmates smiled at him, understanding what he meant. And for the first time in his life, Deku truly believed it. With a sense of peace that he had never known before, Deku stepped forward into his future, no longer defined by his failures or by the expectations of others. He wasn't just a hero. He was a person who had fallen, but who had also learned to rise again, with the help of the people who cared about him. And as they all prepared to continue their training, to face whatever challenges lay ahead, Deku couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, he knew that the future was not something to fear, but something to embrace. With his friends by his side, Deku was ready to face the world, not as a symbol of perfection, but as someone who had learned that true strength came not from never falling, but from standing back up every time. And in that moment, surrounded by his friends, Deku knew that, no matter what, he would never be alone again. The end. And that's it for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this twist on Deku's journey. What if he became emotionless and turned to the dark side? It's definitely a wild thought, and we'd love to know what you think. Be sure to drop your opinions in the comments section below. If you're enjoying these fanfics, make sure to hit that like button and stay tuned for our next video, where we'll be exploring even more exciting stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Fiction Flux.